Hey everybody, Paul Corbett here from the TheSITREP, and today we are talking about, I know the thumbnail says shocking, but it's not. It's all about magnets. It's a different type of therapy that individuals can use if they would like or are interested to assist them with different issues such as depression or anxiety, other different symptoms of PTSD. But we have an expert here, Dr. Philip, to explain all of this. And so if you can, for the audience, what exactly is TMS and what's the goal?
Yeah. So TMS, or Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation, is using high-powered magnets to essentially help the brain to do the things that it's supposed to be doing. So we take folks who have depression and otherwise, and apply these magnets. And if we do this gently enough, long enough, and carefully enough, it gets people much better. Like you said, it's been around for over a decade now. And so it's first developed for depression. It's FDA cleared for depression, meaning that people get this in the community all the time, as well as at the VA. What our job here has been to make sure that we can use it for post-traumatic stress and all the other things that come along with it.
So most of its use over the past decade and a couple of years has been focused on depression.
That's correct. Yeah.
But now are there only specific symptoms that you're looking at, or is it the cohort that makes up the varying levels and degrees of PTSD?
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons I was in community before coming to the VA, and I had seen this work in people who were veterans and people who had PTSD. I should also add, so I'm not a veteran myself. I was in medical school when 9/11 happened. And I had very good friends who went right into the military at that point. So even though I've not been through these things personally, I have seen its impact firsthand over the years. And I saw this new treatment that looked like it had a lot of potential, looks like it could really help people, and had an opportunity to start a clinic over here at the Providence VA. That was then in 2012, really focusing on both delivering clinical care. At that time, it was for depression, and then doing the research needed to help make sure that we could make it work for folks who had post-traumatic stress. And to your question, is it one particular symptom or otherwise? And my goal is for it to help everyone who walks in the door. So, and we have seen that. Everybody's illness is different. Each person is different. And everybody gets better in a different way. But my goal is for everybody to get better.
And so what is the expectation that a veteran, when they walk in here, what expectation can they have? And honestly, over the course of time that you've been doing this, what results have you seen?
Yeah. So people will get to me first by getting a referral from their usually mental health provider. Sometimes it comes from primary care as well. And it's after that they have tried usually some sort of medication. Either it hasn't worked for them or they haven't been able to tolerate it. And then what they do is they come in for a consultation. We sit down and really describe what the device is and how it works, things along that line. And I describe, our experience with it over this last time, which is, at this point, about 2/3 of people who walk in my door, I can get better to some degree or another. And of those, so about 1/3 of the people who walk in the door, I can get really life-changingly, profoundly better.
And what do you mean by that, life-changing?
People will come in, and it's usually in the first couple of weeks, and they'll say, "Hey, doc, this thing is really interesting. I'm not sure it's working, but I just went out on a date for the first time in like 20 years. Or, I was able to go like shopping during daytime hours and I didn't have to go at night when I knew it was going to be empty. Or, before the pandemic, like I went to a concert." All of these things that people enjoyed doing before that they were ill and just could not. And that's usually the first things that come. And then people later start feeling other changes in depression and other symptoms. But those are usually the kinds of things that people will tell me.
So is there a way, like we used to say in the military, to break something down Barney style? Is there a way you can kind of break down what it is that TMS is doing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interrupting that illness that's going on in people's heads. You can think about post-traumatic stress sort of from think about it from a fight or flight perspective. And it's really adaptive to always be in fight mode when you're deployed. And eventually, if you do that for long enough, things can get a little stuck, almost like the gas is getting stuck in a car. What this is doing is it's interrupting that process and allowing the brake to come back online. We're literally stimulating that part of the brain that's the brake for the fight or flight response.
How is it that you're able to focus in on that, but not change maybe my favorite flavor of ice cream?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So we're stimulating that part of the brain that involves in control. It's right in here, sort of underneath the forehead. And that's the part of the brain that helps you figure out kind of how you want to sort of control what's going on in your life, willpower, if you will. And that's the part that we're stimulating. So we're not stimulating parts that are involved in memory or remembering your favorite things or high school prom or whatever it might be. We're really staying away from that.
Okay. And so there is an imagery component to the study and the work that you're doing with veterans and what have you. Can it explain through the imagery and the data what it is that you're seeing?
Yeah. So whenever people come into our research studies, we will ask them to do an MRI scan, a research MRI scan. It's called functional MRI. And what that allows us to do is look at how different parts of the brain are communicating with each other. And what we can see when people are ill is that the way that the brain is communicating is doing it in a way that's not healthy. And when people get better after stimulation, we can see those connections change. And we will do that by having the MRI beforehand, and then we'll usually do an MRI after people are done getting their treatment. And actually sometimes we'll do MRIs as people go through to kind of get snapshots in time to look at the change and how it's happening.
And is this something that's instantaneous? Kind of like making popcorn in a microwave, like 2 minutes, you're done?
Right.
Or does it have to do with the frequency and the level of the traumatic experience? Or is it just, I'm sure it varies in so many different ways, but is there kind of like, usually people that had this experience tend to follow this line, and people that had this experience tend to follow that line?
Yeah. So let me answer this in two ways. When people come into the clinic, usually they're coming in for daily treatments for some number of weeks, usually 6 weeks. And one of the reasons that we do these daily treatments over time is that we have seen through research and various other sources is that when we're stimulating gently over time, that's the way that we can make long-lasting changes for people. So it is possible to get people to feel better faster with a number of other interventions and things that we do, but the problem is it doesn't stick. And my goal is to help people get better in a way that's meaningful to them. And that means when we get people better, to keep them better as long as we can. In my hands here on the clinic side, and also even in some of our research, that's measured in years. So on average, people are better for about 2 years after they go through the treatment that we give in the clinic here.
So earlier, before we got on camera, I had the delight of experiencing TMS, and it was thank you for being gentle, by the way. Originally, when we went up to the other machine, you're testing out, seeing what, I guess, my wavelength is, or what is that process? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so that's what we call measuring a motor threshold, which means how much magnetic energy it's going to take for me to make your finger twitch. So literally what we did was we took the magnetic coil, we put it over the part of the brain that controls the hand, and then found out how much energy it takes going into the brain to make your fingers twitch. In your case, it was really more of a sort of this kind of a movement. And that calibrates the device to what your brain needs to get the nerves in your brain to fire in the way that we want them to fire. It's calibrating the machine. And
so, I keep forgetting that it's not electricity that's coming through there. Like it's not electric shock. Like before I came in to do it, I'm like, oh man, it's going to be like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I'm going to, have paddles next to my head or something like that. It's not like that at all. But it was very subtle. It was unexpected, and I got quite a reaction like the first time once we did the big one. But it wasn't like painful. It's just different. I don't really know how to explain it, honestly.
Yeah, it's usually pretty benign as people experience it. So, it feels weird. It feels like some people will describe it as a woodpecker on the forehead.
That's actually a good description.
Some people will describe it as static electricity on steroids. There have been many different descriptions that I've heard from people over the years. It's odd. It's not pleasant. But I have never had anybody quit because of how it felt. And we do a number of things to make sure that it's tolerable for everyone.
And so are there any side effects from this? And are there particular medical conditions that would keep someone from being able to participate in TMS?
Yeah. So there's a number of things that we think about with this kind of stuff. And what I want to say first is because this isn't a medication, there's none of the side effects that we would get from medications. You're not putting a pill in your mouth. So there's no risk of weight gain, diabetes, sexual side effects, any of that stuff. That does not exist for this. The most common side effect from this is that it's uncomfortable, as we talked about. And people can sometimes get some like eyebrow twitching or whatnot when the machine is on, which is totally normal. It's when we're just stimulating the nerves in your eye or over your eye, but it is a little bit odd. Technically, whenever we stimulate the brain, there is a risk of having a seizure. In the countless number of treatments that I have done since we have started this, both here and even beforehand, I've never had anyone had a seizure. And that's really because we're very careful with that finger twitch calibration. That said, there are certain situations where this can be dangerous. So because we're using magnets, we don't do this on folks who have metal inside of their head or metal near that magnet. That would be dangerous. There are certain street drugs that I will say just don't play well with this, and so we have to be very careful about people who are really struggling with drugs and alcohol. I will say it's standard practice that people who have those kinds of challenges do come through our clinic. It just requires a little bit more of some communication with the clinical team. But it's not an absolute barrier because that's reality. Those are the major sort of side effects and considerations. The other thing I'll say is that we also generally don't do this for folks who have what we would call bipolar 1. So the kind of bipolar illness where people get so manic and ill that they need to be locked up in a hospital or have that kind of thing going on. And that's really just from a safety perspective.
Okay. And so, I mean, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but for any individual that's out there in the audience right now that may be interested in participating in this, either as a study or as part of their own care moving forward through life, what's the best way for them to be able to interact with individuals like you? I mean, it's because you're not the only location that does this in the country, in the VA. There's what, 20 or 30 other locations? Yeah,
so there's the one of the really neat things about this is that there's many ways that people can engage with it. Like you said, either on the clinical side, just as part of their regular clinical care, or as part of research studies. From a clinical side, folks need a referral from their psychiatrist, and usually there will be someone in their area that offers this in some form or another. Right now, we have a nationwide, what we call a pilot rollout, or I should say a pilot program, where we're putting TMS devices in as many VAs as we can. There's 20 some odd that have these clinics going right now, and those are all across the nation. And the mental health departments in each of those VAs will know if that exists locally. And that's that's standard clinical care that's offered as at those VAs. From the research side of things, there are actually many of the places that are doing the clinical care also have some sort of transcranial magnetic stimulation research or related research, and often those folks who have the expertise doing it clinically are the same people who are doing research studies to advance how we understand how it works or various other things.
Well, Dr. Phillip, thank you so much for joining us on the SITREP and talking to us about TMS. And to everybody that's out there in the audience, if this is something that you're interested in, be sure to check out the description below. We'll have a bunch of links and all sorts of other stuff. And you guys, you're going to have a website go live pretty soon,
We will
right?
have a go live website shortly.
So once that's up and running, we'll make sure that that's in the description as well. But Doc, appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And to all you guys and gals out there, thank you for your service to our country.
You have questions? We have answers. The SITREP is your trusted source for veterans benefits information with expert analysis and interviews with leaders from the field. To find past shows, podcasts, and other content, search #TheSITREP on YouTube.